Chapter 1 The New Normal. Rusty Thompson sat on the porch of his weather-beaten home, a can of beer sweating in his hand as he watched the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was a canvas of oranges and purples, but Rusty's eyes were drawn to the ground, to the streets of his hometown that had once been as familiar as the lines on his palm. Now they were a labyrinth of strangeness. The Thompson family had lived in this town for generations. Rusty's grandfather used to say, "We put down roots so deep, you'd need a shovel to dig us out." But as Rusty watched a group of aliens walk by, creatures that looked quite similar to humans, but with pale purple-hued skin, streamlined ears, and small frames, he wondered what his grandfather would say now. The first signs of change had been subtle, like the first drops of rain before a storm. New faces started showing up at the grocery store, the post office, and even the church. That was the one that stuck with Rusty the most. Church was supposed to be constant, sacred, untouched. Pastor Mike had welcomed them with open arms, quoting scripture with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes.
"For there is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is no male and female,"
he said one Sunday, voice catching ever so slightly before he added,
"and there is neither human nor alien. For you are all one in Christ Jesus."
Someone coughed. Another made a single clap. Then the sanctuary had gone quiet, and just like that, the service moved on. Rusty sat stiff in his pew, hands folded tighter than usual. He knew that verse, had heard it a dozen times growing up, but somehow it sounded different now. Forced. Not false, exactly, just filtered. Like Pastor Mike wasn't preaching from the pulpit so much as walking a tightrope, trying to say the right thing before someone higher up decided he was spreading the wrong kind of gospel. Rusty didn't blame him, not entirely. He could see the weight Pastor Mike carried, the fear behind the optimism, like a man trying to keep the roof from collapsing by pretending the cracks weren't there. But still, something about it felt hollow. He wondered what the aliens even got out of church. Was it language practice, financial help, a chance to be seen playing along? It sure didn't look like faith. He hated thinking that way, hated the guilt that followed. His mama would have called it judgment, and maybe she'd be right. But deep down, Rusty couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere along the line, the church had stopped fearing God and started fearing man. One species Rusty never saw at church, despite their heavenly-sounding name, Sci-Fi, were the so-called architects of the alien migration. They weren't the kind to kneel, not to God, not to anything. The pastor called them brothers from beyond, insisted their presence was proof of God's boundless creation. But Rusty noticed they never joined the service. He remembered his former boss, Leo, scoffing at the name.
"Seraphim? Come on, I called them grabblers, 'cause that's all they do. Grab whatever ain't nailed to the floor. Markets, laws, land, even our damn memories. They rebranded the whole freaking world while we stood there like a bunch of mooks, clapping like it was a magic trick."
He'd wipe his hands on a rag and keep going, voice rising like he was giving a speech nobody asked for.
Now, don't get me wrong. Not all the aliens are like that. Some of them, they mind their own business. Work a job, don't haggle, pay on time. I can live with that.
Then he'd jab a finger toward the sky, like the Seraphim were listening.
"These freaking pricks, they stroll in like they're the Pope, acting like the whole world owes them something. Talk your ears off with that slick bullshit, smiling like they're giving you a loan while they're robbing you blind. They're breathing their own fumes, Rusty. Smug don't even scratch the surface."
The name Grabbler stuck, at least in the back rooms and bar stools, even after it got scrubbed from official channels and flagged by corporate comms as xeno-inflammatory language. Few people recognized it now, and those who did wouldn't dare say it out loud, not unless they trusted the company or had already stopped caring about consequences.
They didn't invade, they marketed, rebranded, moved in polite, and by the time folks realized what happened, they were guests in their own damn house.
Leo had moved into town before the aliens did, but he never really belonged. Some said he used to run chop shops. Others swore he was hiding from a federal indictment. No one could prove a damn thing, and the local sheriff had tried. But Leo was smart. Too smart for small-town law, and just scary enough to be left alone. He paid cash or bartered, kept quiet, and ran a scooter garage that always had at least one project in pieces on the floor and one client who owed him money. He gave Rusty his first job sweeping floors and putting up tools, back when he was 12 and still scared of getting yelled at for touching the wrong socket. Rusty's mama didn't like him working there. That man's got no God in him, she said. It was during one of those long summer afternoons, when the garage fan just pushed around the heat, that Leo gave Rusty a piece of advice that stuck like a burr.
Let me tell you something, kid. Being on the outside, that's the only kind of freedom left. You quit kissing ass. Stop playing nice with rules written by pencil necks in air-conditioned offices who never broke a sweat in their lives. And you keep your eyes open. You see the game for what it really is.
Rusty had just nodded, unsure what to say. The idea made his stomach twist. Not obeying the rules? Saying whatever you thought, whenever you wanted? He was raised better than that. It made him wonder what kind of childhood Leo must have had to say something like that. His advice didn't sound like something a good man would say. It felt wrong, crude, no, wild, like something you'd hear from a barbarian or a criminal. Just then, an alien drone buzzed overhead, casting a shadow across the garage floor. Leo and Rusty looked up through the streaked shop window and watched it linger for a few seconds, silent except for the faint whir of its rotors. Then it drifted off, disappearing beyond the trees. Leo's eyes met Rusty's, his expression flat but alert.
Think that new toy belongs to the sheriff?
Rusty didn't answer. He wasn't sure if it was a real question or a warning. Either way, the silence felt too big for him to fill.
Don't worry, you'll come around. Sooner or later you'll see the truth. The rules don't protect you, kid. They just keep you tame. Obedience? That's for dogs, not men. You want to sit, stay, roll over, go join a kennel.
Rusty never did come around, not entirely. But years later, when the Seraphine owned the banks and the billboards, when human holidays got replaced by galactic integration festivals, and folks acted like it was always this way, he thought of Leo. As Rusty looked across the street at the convenience store, he saw a town losing its identity one sign at a time. The place had changed hands more times than he could count, most recently to aliens. The building's original form was still there, technically, early 20th century brick and mortar, worn smooth by time, held its shape like an old man still wearing his Sunday suit. But everything around it had been gutted or grafted onto. High-efficiency windows with reactive tinting replaced the originals, gleaming too bright against the weathered brick. A solar patio canopy, some kind of feather-light alien alloy that looked like matte black carbon fiber, jutted out from the front like a spaceship wing stuck to a farmhouse. The contrast made Rusty's stomach turn. Nothing about the building flowed. It was like a cube with a dozen egg-shaped tumors bolted on, rounded glass pods and asymmetrical curves mashed into the square geometry without rhythm or respect. It looked less like a remodel and more like a joke played by someone who hated the original but wasn't allowed to tear it down. A copy of whatever high-concept architecture fad was going around when they started modernizing, ruining cathedrals, libraries, courthouses. He'd seen a vid once of a European museum where they'd glued a glass blob onto the side of a Gothic chapel. This felt like that. An insult with a building permit. The old "Welcome to Millville" sign, hand-painted by his Aunt Sue and hung proudly in the window for decades, had been replaced by a holographic display that shimmered greetings in a dozen different languages, most of them unrecognizable. He remembered sitting outside as a kid, legs swinging under the table, eating sandwiches wrapped in wax paper while his mom chatted with the locals. That rough concrete patio had been sealed off and enclosed, replaced with a climate-controlled viewing room for off-worlders to sample authentic Earth snacks. The store had rebranded as an intergalactic food hub, stocked with bulk imports from alien markets and serving dishes that looked like science experiments gone wrong. Maybe they'd leave? That thought had become a kind of mental itch. Rusty scratched every evening around sunset. Not out of spite, he just figured history had a rhythm to it. The Vikings, for example, had landed in America long before Columbus ever touched a sail. They built little outposts, chopped some wood, maybe traded with the locals, and then they left. No war, no conquest, just drifted back into legend. Maybe the aliens would follow the same pattern, show up curious, take some notes, get bored of Earth's chaos and humidity, and vanish into the stars. After all, aliens mostly kept to themselves. Whenever a new batch arrived, they were housed in apartments that resembled hives. Outside of a few stores that specialized in alien cuisine, you really didn't see them wandering around. With most not owning any land, they could pack up and leave any time they liked. The hives could always be repurposed. Rusty liked that idea. It made the strangeness feel temporary, like waking up in someone else's dream and waiting to blink back into your own. To calm himself, he replayed old memories like reruns of a show that had been canceled without warning. He pictured his high school football field lit up on at night, the sharp smell of grass and nachos in the air, helmets cracking against each other. He remembered his mama waving from the porch, calling him in before the street lights blinked on. Even the little things, gas station coffee, the way old men argued at the barber shop, the sound of gravel under car tires had taken on a golden, almost mythical glow. Things had never been perfect, but they were familiar, human, and lately, that counted for more than it used to. Still, a deeper part of him, quieter but sharper, wasn't so sure. The Vikings didn't build schools, rewrite street signs, or show up in government hearings talking about integration milestones. No, these newcomers weren't tourists, they were settlers, and that quiet part of Rusty, the one that didn't trust easily, had started to wonder if maybe Earth wasn't theirs anymore. And maybe it never would be again. The tipping point came when Rusty drove past the school where he'd learned to read and write, only to find the marquee announcing a new curriculum in universal languages and cultures. The English alphabet had been replaced by symbols that looked like they belonged in a NASA control room. Rusty felt a pang of loss so acute it was as if someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. It was like watching a movie where the actors forgot their lines, where the plot twisted in directions that defied logic, and yet everyone around him seemed content to play their roles, blinded by the dazzling promise of a new age of enlightenment and prosperity. Just the other day at church, Rusty overheard a woman proudly sharing that her granddaughter was being raised bilingual. The girl's parents had hired an alien nanny to teach her while they were at work, entrusting their most precious possession to someone who didn't even share their species. Rusty couldn't help but think about how much harder it had become to make ends meet since the human and alien economies began to collide. Expert economists kept assuring the public that the disruptions were temporary, limited to things like food and housing, and that the future was brighter than ever. but they never said for whom. Rusty took a long swig of his beer, the bitter taste doing little to wash away the unease that settled deeper into his soul. As the sun finally disappeared, leaving behind a sky as dark and unfathomable as Rusty's thoughts, he made a silent decision. He would not accept the changes being forced upon his culture, as if everything he knew or cared about was slowly evaporating right in front of him. And so, under a sky filled with stars that seemed both closer and farther away than ever, Rusty Thompson closed his eyes and prayed. He prayed for guidance, for strength, and most of all, for the wisdom to navigate a world that felt less like home with each passing day. The stars looked beautiful tonight, almost enough to forget they didn't belong to him anymore. The morning sun was a pale imitation of his evening self, casting a weak light over the town square as Rusty made his way to work. He'd landed a job as an IT technician, a role that seemed increasingly incongruous in a world where technology had leapt light years ahead in the span of a few short years. Rusty couldn't help but feel like a blacksmith in the age of the automobile, clinging to skills that were rapidly becoming obsolete. As he walked, Rusty passed by a series of new shops and stalls, each more exotic than the last. Rusty shook his head. It was as if the town square had turned into a bazaar from another galaxy. Just then, a tug on his sleeve pulled him out of his thoughts. He looked down to see a young boy, no older than 8, shoeless, with dirt-smudged cheeks and eyes that held a desperate kind of hunger.
Mister, you got any change? I ain't eaten in 2 days. School's out for summer, and they don't feed us no more.
Something inside Rusty broke. He reached into his lunch bag and pulled out the sandwich he'd made for himself, a simple affair of turkey and cheese on whole grain bread. "Here, take this," he said, handing the sandwich to the boy. The boy grabbed the sandwich and ran off without a word of thanks. Rusty watched as the boy took a few steps, pushed half of the sandwich into his mouth, and gave the other half to a little girl. Rusty felt a wave of despair wash over him. It was the realization that the moral fabric of his community was unraveling at the seams. In a world where people were more concerned with trading in exotic goods than feeding their own children, what hope was there for the future? It was a question that encapsulated the struggle of the light against the darkness, of reason against irrationality. Rusty wondered about the preacher. The church is supposed to be the salt of the earth. Salt preserves meat, so if the salt loses its savor, the meat rots and man goes hungry. Had the church lost its savor? What rallying cry could awaken his community from its ethical slumber? Rusty continued his walk, his boots making a rhythmic thud against the pavement. The town square was now a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes, a far cry from the monochrome simplicity of his youth. He passed by the old library, its stone facade now adorned with a neon sign flashing in a language that looked like a cross between hieroglyphics and mathematical equations. Next to it, in much smaller letters, was the word library. It was as if the English language had been demoted, relegated to the status of a footnote in the story of its own land. Rusty felt a pang of loss, a yearning for the days when life was simpler, when the world made sense. But alongside that loss was a flicker of curiosity. It was a moment of existential reckoning, a confrontation with the unknown that left him both terrified and strangely exhilarated. He realized that he had a choice. He could retreat into the comfort of nostalgia, clinging to a past that would never return, or he could step forward into the uncertainty, armed with the courage to question, to seek, to challenge the new normal that enveloped him like a fog. Could there be wisdom in these changes, Rusty wondered? Could there be something to learn from these alien cultures, these otherworldly perspectives? Or was it all a facade, a veneer progress masking a deeper decay? And so, as Rusty finally reached the door of his workplace, he took a deep breath and stepped inside. Rusty's workplace was a maze of cubicles, each one a little island of personal space in a sea of corporate monotony. The walls were a sterile shade of gray, adorned with motivational posters that seemed to mock rather than inspire. Teamwork makes the dream work, one read, featuring a picture of rowers in perfect sync. Rusty couldn't help but wonder if any of them were rowing in circles. He sat at his desk, surrounded by dual monitors, a keyboard, and a headset that connected him to an endless stream of support calls. "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" he'd ask, a script so ingrained he could recite it in his sleep. The calls were a blur of technical jargon and human frustration, a microcosm of a world increasingly dependent on technology it barely understood. During a lull between calls, Rusty's co-worker leaned over the cubicle divider.
Hey, man, you following the elections? Democracy's hanging by a thread, you know?
Rusty looked up, his eyes meeting Devery's earnest gaze. Honestly, does it even matter? Seems like all the candidates are cut from the same cloth. Party loyalists who'd sell their own mother for a shot at fame and fortune. Then there are the aliens. I just wonder, can someone who hasn't shared in Earth's struggles truly understand what justice looks like here? Devery's face flushed with anger.
Aliens running for office are not a threat. It's a breakthrough. We've spent centuries trapped in human-centric systems that prioritize greed, borders, and short-term thinking. If these beings come from a post-scarcity society with real justice and sustainability, why wouldn't we want that perspective in the room?
It sounds like you look up to them, like they are better than us. I don't know if they're better, maybe just different.
It's evolution. Letting them in forces us to confront our own supremacy and expand the scope of democracy. If we believe in equity, we can't draw the line at species. Maybe it's time someone not driven by money or ego had a shot at leadership.
Rusty hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Diversity's one thing, but shouldn't we be concerned about who's really pulling the strings? I mean, how well do we even know these aliens who are suddenly in positions of power? Devery's eyes narrowed.
That sounds dangerously close to xenophobia, Rusty.
Before Rusty could respond, an email notification forced itself to the top of his screen. It was an auto-scheduler message from Tina, his boss. In bold letters it read, "Rusty, please see me in my office after lunch. Regards, Mix Tina Gramwell's auto assistant." Rusty knew what happened. The auto assist AI that they installed in every headset overheard the conversation. In a millisecond, it predicted all of Rusty's possible responses, assigned weights to each one, determining that any response on his part would be met with hostility and calculating the likelihood of him causing a civil lawsuit for the company. Rusty was just a cog in the machine, and if any part risked failure, it was swapped out with another one before it could fail. Rusty knocked softly on Tina's office door before entering. Her office was a stark contrast to the cubicles outside, adorned with plants and framed degrees from laughable colleges that spoke of a different kind of ambition and a weak mind full of hubris.
Rusty, please have a seat. I want to reiterate, this is a safe, inclusive workspace. That includes all sentient beings. Earlier, something you said raised red flags.
Wait, are you talking about what I said in the break room? I wasn't being hostile. I just said maybe someone who didn't grow up here, on Earth, might not fully understand our history. That's a fair point, right?
The screen behind Tina suddenly spoke up without any introduction.
It showed the face of a young professional man who Rusty thought was likely a lawyer based on his office decor and suit.
Your argument is a coded assumption about outsider status. Your phrasing implied an inherent lack of qualification based on species. That violates our inclusion metrics.
But it's not about them. It's about context. If a Seraphine shows up and wants to regulate our food supply, shouldn't we ask if they know what food insecurity even means here?
Rusty. That kind of framing, a seraphine shows up, it sounds othering. We don't use species-sized language in this company.
Your intent may be thoughtful, but your impact is exclusionary. We're dangerously close to what legal defines as intersentient bias.
Oh, come on. Intersentient bias? I'm just asking if maybe leadership should understand the experiences of the people they serve.
And that's a conversation you are no longer authorized to have on company time. Mr. Thompson, this is your final warning.
Let's be clear. If you cannot adapt your language to reflect our organizational values, we'll have no choice but to explore separation. Mix Gramwell has a document for you to sign.
Rusty nodded, a sense of defeat settling over him. Understood. As he returned to his assigned cubicle, he wondered about his future. A daily grind of unfulfilling work, punctuated by moments of stifling conformity? Would he ever get the chance to follow his dreams, to break free from the invisible chains that bound him to a life of quiet desperation? As he put his headset back on and braced himself for another round of support calls, Rusty felt a growing sense of unrest. It was a feeling he couldn't shake, a nagging question that refused to be silenced, much like the auto-assist AI that was whispering in one ear the entire time, reading a troubleshooting script to him. After a day that felt like sleepwalking through someone else's dream, Rusty found himself outside the old diner. He stepped inside. The place had changed dramatically over the past few years. Earth trinkets and alien curios cluttered the walls, a forced harmony of cultures that felt more like a museum exhibit than a hometown hangout. The air was thicker now. Less greasy spoon, more off-world lounge. Sliding into a booth, Rusty picked up a menu. Rather than finding burgers and shakes in the center of the menu, he found half a page of unpronounceables. Down at the bottom, tucked almost apologetically, a small box labeled Earth Specials. He ordered a beer, a slice of pizza, and breadsticks. His own quiet protest. As he waited, he scanned the room. It was mostly filled with humans. A couple of aliens mingled over their meals, voices rising and falling in strange dialects. Most of the talk in the diner was about the upcoming election or some new sports league. There was passion, sure, but it felt hollow, like cheering for a team you couldn't name. What good was voting when the whole town had become a spaceport? Rusty felt like a museum piece, present, but no longer part of the exhibit. Rusty stared at the old flat screen mounted behind the diner counter, its edges duct-taped and sagging. A political debate played on low volume, but the subtitles marched across the bottom in sharp white lettering. The candidates stood in a semicircle beneath a holographic Earth, rotating slowly as if to remind the audience what was still at stake. Moderator.
Let's talk about the Human Outreach and Planetary Equity Initiative, HOPE. With unemployment at historic lows, 30% of citizens now benefit from the Universal Assistance Network, but the cost of expanding HOPE has raised concerns. How would each of you fund an increase in planetary placement stipends without cutting essential services here on Earth?
Rusty sipped his drink, bracing for what came next. He had heard that the HOPE program was intended to give struggling families a new start on the Seraphine homeworld. The basic idea was to let the aliens study and interact with humanity from the comfort of their own world. To repay the cultural exchange, the families were provided with new accommodations, education, and a similar level of access to serifine tech that we are enjoying on Earth. Candidate number 1, Senator Vail, Earth United Party.
We can't afford not to expand hope. Every citizen relocated is one less strain on our ecosystem, our housing grid, our emergency services. This is not a burden. It's an investment in stability.
Candidate number 2, Minister Shan, Progressive Integration Alliance.
Senator Vail talks about strain. What about dignity? Hope gives struggling communities a clean slate, off-world opportunity, and post-species equity. We should be increasing stipends, not debating them.
Candidate number 3, Councillor Dent.
Let's be honest. Earth's carrying capacity was exceeded decades ago. Hope is the most humane form of population normalization ever devised. The Seraphine have offered infrastructure. We must meet them halfway. I propose full debt forgiveness for any family willing to enroll.
Candidate number 4, Calethra, first alien on the stage.
The metrics speak clearly. Cross-cultural alignment is up 68%, civic harmony up 42%. Every dollar invested in hope is going to give returns not just for us, but for our children and our children's children. Hope isn't just a program, it's a promise.
Rusty hated the fake accent, the way the alien candidate, Calethra, stretched out his vowels like he had studied 100 hours of campaign footage, made his skin crawl. It wasn't just the voice, it was the whole performance. From the hand-over-heart pledge to his scripted nods at good old-fashioned Earth values, he mimicked humanity with an almost mechanical precision. Even his name felt like it had been crafted in a marketing lab. Calethra, as if someone had mashed up Greek poetry in a baby name app, labeled timeless and trustworthy. Rusty didn't buy it. He didn't trust anyone who wanted to blend in that badly. There were only 2 constants in the universe, far as he could tell: the speed of light and the lengths people would go to win a popularity contest. As Rusty took another sip of his beer, he caught the eye of the waitress, a middle-aged woman named Carol, who had been working at the diner for as long as he could remember. She wore the same apron, but her name tag now also displayed her name in an alien script. "Hey, Carol, what's the story with the new menu?" Rusty asked, gesturing to the laminated sheet in front of him. Carol sighed as she refilled his coffee cup.
Well, Rusty, same owners, but we got a new investor. Alien fella thought it'd be a good idea to make the place more inclusive, if you catch my drift.
Inclusive, huh? Rusty raised an eyebrow. Seems like a lot of these new dishes are going untouched.
Oh, ha! You're not wrong. Turns out most aliens don't really trust human cooks or servers. They've got their own places, their own foods. So here we are, stuck with a menu full of items that almost nobody orders.
Rusty looked around the diner, taking in the empty seats and the untouched Earth specials that sat forlornly in the display case. Seems like inclusivity is a one-way street these days. Carol nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of resignation and concern.
Well, it's a strange world we're living in, Rusty. Everything's changing so fast, it's hard to keep up. But what can you do? You adapt, or you get left behind.
His food arrived, and Rusty took a sip of his beer. It tasted different, as if the very hops and barley had been altered by the changing world around him. He took a bite of his pizza, its once familiar flavors now tinged with a sense of loss he couldn't quite place. Rusty thought about Carol's words as he finished his meal. Adapt or get left behind. It echoed like a threat dressed as advice. Outside, the night was unusually still, the sky dimmed by ads flickering across the clouds. Rusty's boots echoed on the concrete as he walked home, his mind unable to settle. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was tired, maybe, or maybe just disconnected. like the town itself had quietly slipped into a costume party and no one had told him to dress up. Somewhere deep down, a thought stirred, not a vow, not a mission, just an uneasy question that wouldn't let him sleep. When did we agree to all this? And why couldn't he remember saying yes?